Okay, thank you, thank you. I want to welcome everybody. My name is Diane Davey, and I'm the Executive Director of WorkInCulture. For any of you who don't know about WorkInCulture, we're a nonprofit art service organization. We support the professional lives of artists and creative workers through business and entrepreneurial skills training, through related research, and through resources such as our very popular job board. Before we launch in, I want to recognize that WorkInCulture is very grateful that we have the opportunity to collaborate with and support artists and cultural workers in various traditional territories across Ontario. Our office is located on the land that's the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, Chippewa, Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people, including many who are wonderful and talented artists. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, we have a fantastic panel lined up, and it's the culminating event of the latest iteration of our CreativeBoost Countdown to Business series. And I have the pleasure of introducing our wonderful moderator. Snjezana Pruginic, sorry, Snjezana. I had it down before. Pruginic is a multidisciplinary creative professional who's been working within the intersection of art, wellness, community, social justice, and entrepreneurship for over 20 years. She has been with WorkInCulture for 3 years now, developing and facilitating workshops, including this one, and webinars, and we're delighted to have her as our moderator today. I'm going to hand it over to the very capable Snjezana.
Thank you, Diane, for the introduction to WorkInCulture. So for those who are not from the workshop that we've been doing, just a little bit about this workshop, what it is. CreativeBoost is something that we created about a year and a half ago, I believe now, and it's typically a full day workshop that we deliver, and we always finish it off with a panel of local artists. So we have previously delivered this workshop to 25 plus communities around Ontario, focusing on small communities and rural communities, where we always kind of finish off that day with this piece of community and bringing different artists at different stages in their business growth and development to kind of have these conversations. It's always been such a well-received part of the workshops, so we wanted to make sure we continue it even when we're transferred everything to online. Online, we've been running these workshops in 3 sessions, so the cohort that's in that right now, we have 1 more session next week, and then we have another session starting in August. So this panel, you will see people here who are in the workshops, but also we wanted to, since we are online and Zoom makes things easier to open up to everybody, we wanted to also open up to everybody, because previously when we would have these panels, it would literally just be the participants of the program in the small town that we're in. So I'm very happy that we're able to open it up and bring in artists that previously we wouldn't be able to, because you don't live in the communities where we were. So I want to introduce our panel to everyone who is here. And then we're just gonna go through some questions and have a conversation. I ask everyone who's attending to kind of think about, questions you may have or things that you wanna kind of bounce and maybe reflect with the panel, because it's such a great opportunity. The amount of talent and experience on here is amazing. So if you have anything that you're kind of working through, I know there's people in here who are kind of at the beginning of their creative entrepreneurial journey. And there's people here who've been artists for a long time, but are now trying to, to use the overused word pivot into being more of a business, and think about how they can sustain themselves during COVID while doing their art. So just kind of giving a bit of to the panelists as well, who's in the audience. And then there's people in here who I don't know, so I don't know where they're at. But why don't we start by introducing the panelists, and then we'll just kind of jump right in and have a conversation. So I want to start with Sandra. So Sandra Laronde, if you can just wave. So, we see your name, but for anybody that's not looking at the camera. So Sandra is a highly accomplished arts leader, creator, and innovator, and has over 27 years of experience in the arts and the culture sector. She plays a pivotal role in the ongoing Indigenous cultural resurgence, and is the founder and artistic director of Red Sky Performance, one of Canada's leading companies of contemporary Indigenous performance in Canada and worldwide. As one of the strongest touring companies of its size in Canada, Red Sky has participated in landmark world events such as the Venice Biennale, I can never say that word properly, Jacob's Pillow, 2 cultural Olympiads in Beijing and Vancouver, Shanghai International Arts Festival, as well as touring to countless communities across Canada, USA, and Europe. For 9 years, Sandra was also the Director of Indigenous Arts at the Banff Center for Arts and Creativity, where she provided a vision for a compelling future of Indigenous arts at the Banff Center. So thank you, Sandra, for being with us. It's an honor that you're here.
Great, thank you.
So moving on to Solitaire. So you're gonna wave, listed under Solly Music. So Solitaire is a multi-Juno Award-nominated hip-hop artist and producer from Toronto with 2 decades of producing and songwriting experience for iconic artists such as Julie Black, Melanie Fiona, and Glenn Lewis. He has also toured the world with Canadian hip-hop icons Chaclair and Cardinal Official. He brings his music industry experience into artist development and management, and also owns and operates 4 Sound Media Group and 4 Sound Music School since 2014. In addition to his accomplishments in music, since November 2016, Solitaire has been expanding his portfolio as the creator and co-host, along with Miss Misha Gay, DJ Reddy Fox, and No Better Nina, of the talk radio show Hashtag on Vibe 105 FM. The show was created to be a platform to share honest opinions about music, culture, and politics. He has also devoted much of his time to participating in mentorship programs and conducting workshops for marginalized youth in various communities and schools across the city, including his role as the program manager for FU, the Forgiveness Project jail program, which works with currently and formerly incarcerated population using music and pop culture to generate conversations around mental health, amongst other topics. So welcome, Solitaire, or Sally, as we call you, for being here.
It is a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation, and hello, everybody.
So we're gonna move on to Gordon Shadra. Gordon was born and raised in Brampton, Ontario in 1966 and has lived in Toronto for over 25 years. He started painting in 2013 and paints in oil and acrylic on wood. He has exhibited in solo and group art shows in Canada and the United States. His work from photographs at his in-home studio in Toronto's East End. Oh, he works from photographs, my apologies. He received his Bachelor of Design, MAAD, from OCAD University and has a Master's of Education degree from Niagara University. In the spring of 2018, Gordon's painting, In Conversation, was included in an exhibit developed by the Royal Ontario Museum titled, Here We Are Here, Black Canadian Contemporary Art. In the summer of 2018, the exhibit went on tour and was presented at the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts and opened at the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia in June of 2019. Aside from his portraits, Gordon is known for his insightful artist talks and has appeared as a panelist on TVO's The Agenda in Reinventing the Museum, CBC's Radio's Metro Morning, Group of 7 Out, Underrepresented Artists at the AGO, and Gordon's most recent solo exhibit at United Contemporary Gallery includes textile installations along with his painted portraits. So thank you, Gordon, for being here.
My pleasure to be here. Thank you.
It's an honor. And last but not least, we have Daniela Gorley, if you want to wave. So Daniela Gorley is a full-time professional photographer working and living in Toronto. She has actively been working as a photographer 20 years in the commercial art and for the past 13 years in the wedding sector. Her work has led her around the globe, including shooting weddings for celebrity clients. Her unique and artistic style of wedding photography has been published locally and internationally, including but not limited to Vogue, Toronto Life, Rock and Roll Bride, Wedding Bells, She Does the City, and others. She is currently working on an art show that has been postponed to next year due to COVID. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So I want to start off the panel with a question a little bit about, you know, in this course, Countdown to Business, we talk a lot about, you know, we are artists, but we're also a business. So we're also creative professionals. So I want to kind of talk about this idea of when in your own artistic journey as artists, as creative professionals, did it shift for you that mindset of being a creative business as well? If you can kind of talk about that point and when you realized that you were also a creative business alongside being a creative professional. So anybody can start us off and then we'll just move down the line.
I'll start. Okay. It was a challenge for me, to be quite honest, because I had a hard time even recognizing that I was an artist for the longest time, because I got into painting accidentally. So I started painting for fun. It was started off as a hobby, and I started to show, and I started to do a few art fairs. And I think for me, when I realized that it was a business, was when I had to start committing to certain changes in my lifestyle. So for example, looking for a studio space, realizing that I had outgrown the second bedroom in my house, to realize that I had to look for more space. I actually had to start organizing my materials. So it was about 3.5 years, 4 years about 3.5 years into painting. I've been painting for about 7 years. And so about halfway through from now was when I realized I had to start actually keeping track of my expenses as well. All those sorts of things where you start to realize this is becoming bigger than I had intended to. And it was really looking at things like starting to understand that I needed to get an art accountant. I needed to start looking at how much I was actually earning from my business. So there was a number of signifiers for me. I also am lucky enough to say that I have a partner who has his MBA. So he was on me about that stuff, even if I didn't. So one of the pieces that I would have as advice would be to surround yourself with people who know more than you do, which we can talk about that later. But for me, it really was recognizing that I needed to establish a certain amount of control over what was happening, whether it was organizing my materials, whether it was organizing my receipts and looking at taxes, and whether it was looking for a bigger space to actually effectively do my work.
Mm-hmm. So really some of those structural pieces. That's
Exactly.
Business to business, yeah.
Exactly. I had enough internal structure with regards to intrinsic structure for actually committing to doing the work. But it was actually recognizing, yes, you're right, it's the external structure that I really had to take care of. Like I was committing a certain amount of time to painting all the time, so I knew that was there. But as you said, it was actually getting the rest of my life organized when I realized I couldn't just kind of let it go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and that's something we talk about in the workshop. It's also preparing for growth and setting yourself up for success. And
Growth.
And growth is a part of that. And there's a point where we kind of transition from just doing the work to actually making that be our life's work income, our life's, set structure through which we work.
Exactly. Growth kind of comes at you as a surprise, I think. Even though you're aware of it while it's happening, you have to always have a moment to step outside and look back at what's going on for clarity.
That's great. Thank you. How about somebody else? When was that moment for you when you realized that you actually have to kind of put on this business mindset to do the work, to have it sustain?
I guess I'll go next. I think for me, it was when I bought my first studio, and you realize things like accounting and pricing and realizing how you have to put value on your time. All of these kind of things were new to me for a large part of my career. I was kind of a hippie. Like, as an artist, you're kind of like, I just want to do art. I just want to wake up in the morning and make beats and write songs and go on tour. And you get kind of infatuated with the life of being an artist. And then you buy your first piece of equipment and you start, getting into the actual business of it. And you're like, oh, I have expenses and overhead and insurance and all this kind of stuff. And, life comes at you fast. But I think for me, it's putting yourself in the moment is a big thing for me. You don't know what you're capable of until you actually immerse yourself in it, and then you surprise yourself. So you use that passion that you have for your art form. And I like what Gordon said about surrounding yourself with people who know more than you. A friend of mine gave me a quote that always stays with me. He said, "If you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room." I'm a student of life. I always consider any situation I go into, even at this stage of my career as a producer and a songwriter, a business owner. I always go into every situation with anybody, no matter how old they are or whatever stage they are in their career, with the understanding that there's always something to learn from the situation. You should always be learning something new that adds to your toolbox of skill sets. And don't be afraid to delegate what you can't do. That's a big part of what held me back initially, is really feeling like, well, if I'm gonna get this done the way I want it to get done, the only person that can do it is myself. And that mentality is so self-defeating, because what you'll inevitably find yourself doing is burning yourself out, because the time you're spending trying to learn how to do your accounting, or to do your own graphic work, or to do, something that is not within your skill set, is time wasted on focusing on what you're actually good at and at the core of you as an artist. So it's a delicate balance being an artist as well as a business. You really can't do both effectively. So you've got to learn how to delegate very quickly. And in delegating, you have to be able to succinctly tell people what exactly it is that you need and how it needs to be done, and then giving them giving them the freedom to do what they're good at. And collectively, you're only as successful as the team around you is motivated to be on the same page and focus on the same cause. So it's always a learning process, and I think it's important to recognize that you're going to make mistakes, but fall down 7 times, get up 8.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely, the team that you have can support you in either in going up or falling down.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, really important. Thank you. Sandra or Daniela?
Yeah, I can go next. Yeah, I went to school for photography. You guys can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Which didn't teach me anything about business at all. And I started by assisting other photographers, commercial photographers, so I kind of learned just by working. But many years later, I ended up taking a year-long course on how to write a business plan. And that was very eye-opening in terms of the fact that I was running a business, because I had thought of myself, I was also just winging it, really. Especially when I was assisting, I just didn't feel like it was my work. But when I took that course, the biggest things that I learned was obviously the financial plan, and that was really important for me at the time because I had no money. And it really helped me to figure out what I needed to make and what I needed to do in order to cover my bills, which seems really obvious, but it took me 7 years to get to that point. And the other one was market research. I had never taken any time to research commercial photography or any sector of photography. So after I finished this course is kind of when I got into weddings, and I think getting into weddings has propelled me to take on more courses and learn more. So about selling, which was a big thing, like knowing my worth, and we can talk about that later. I never, kind of like Facilitator said, I never stopped really learning. And when it comes to business, there's a lot that I don't know. And I also had to start delegating in order to move forward, which did end up snowballing into more work, more appropriate clients, etc. So I still think a business plan is a great idea, even if you don't use it and never look at it again as a process, as a thing to go through. It was really valuable for me.
Yeah, the session that we just finished is before last week we actually talked about our target market, or we talked about who is the person that we're trying to sell to? Who are the people? It's such an important thing, rather than trying to sell to everyone and trying to do everyone, you end up having no one.
Yeah, exactly. And that, I think that's a bit tough because, you know, it involves looking at yourself from like a self-worth point of view, but also narrowing down and saying that you are really good at something. It means standing up for that. And also that's where you're going to spend a lot of time. So, you know, that whole thing, like investing your time, that's valuable. You know, the more you invest in a certain way or anything, that's going to become more and more valuable over time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Hi, everyone. Misko Gijigatkwe, Tumigmana Shnabe and Donjaba. My name is Sandra Larond. I am from the Tumigmana Shnabe people, the people of Deepwater. I am the artistic director of a company here in Toronto called Red Sky Performance. And we're on the traditional territories of Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat peoples, and Mississaugas of New Credit. So I just want to say thank you so much, and thank you so much to CreativeBoost and WorkInCulture for inviting me to speak today. Thank you. I would say I have a little bit of a different take on it. Maybe it's because of the people who I first met with early on. And so first of all, I think I was just kind of, you know, working along, and then people would say, can you do this? And can you do that? Yeah, I can do that. Yes, I can do that. Would you be able to create a project in this? Yes. Could you start a company in this? Sure, I can do that, you know. And it was sort of like not knowing how much work everything was. And had I known, I don't know, but it is a lot of very, very tremendous work. And the more that you put into it, the more that you get back. You reap so much. In the early days, for example, when I started a company, I started 3 businesses, and all of them are still existing, which is really great. And the first business I started was working with Indigenous women artists, one of the most marginalized groups in the arts sector of Canada. And there is nothing like on all of Turtle Island, Canada and United States for Indigenous women artists. And so I started that. It was very grassroots. It was like almost like a creature with its belly close to the ground, very responsive, taking in information, you know, moving at a certain pace, but through and up through the community. And so that's how I started that business. And then I realized that that business had certain strengths, but it also had certain limitations. So I started another business called Red Sky Performance after that. And I thought, what I want now is a creature that can fly and take off and travel the world and come back and roost in its nest for a little while, home base, and then take off again and go all over and fast. Let's make it happen fast. Let's rise fast. So it was completely the opposite. But one informed the other and vice versa. So I thought that was really interesting when I look back in hindsight. So businesses can grow with you. And I think when I started with, when I started Red Sky Performance, which was also from scratch, is Thompson Highway, who's a well-known playwright, and he ran Native Earth Performing Arts for many, many years. And he had said to me, Sandra, piece of advice, always have your hand in the artistic direction, but always know on the operational side, on the business side of how to run things. Have your hands in both to a certain extent so you know what's always going on. And I noticed when I was working through Native Women in the Arts, I had to actually, and into Red Sky, I actually had to train my brain to be able to go back and forth. So I'd be thinking very creatively about something, and then I'd recognize, okay, now I got to make a shift in my brain to like go to the business and think in another way. And I find business very creative. I find building relationships very creative. I find building budgets very creative. I find thinking about what is the blueprint, what is the map, what's the pathway to, you know, bringing people along down this road to elevating Indigenous arts and culture in Canada and worldwide. How could we build a pathway that's future looking, future facing, aligned with the future, and how do we bring people along the way with us, and what's the kind of work that we build that is aligned with the future. All of that is extremely creative. So I don't necessarily think of business as not being creative. I find it extremely creative. And I also find building arts projects and teams of people, arts teams, not just business teams, but art teams as well. It's like there's a finesse to all of that. Team building, and then how do we make something happen from there? So so in a lot of ways, creativity is in both parts, in both parts of my brain. But I had to do a lot of work. But I'd always just clock. Okay, now I got to shift. Learn to shift, and I would learn. Okay, memorize that. Learn how to because so much of memory is so important to really to success, and so. I was then really interested in looking at, Indigenous art forms, like even the powwow, for example. How many of you have been to a powwow? But what I loved about it was there was a model already there in some ways. So it's looking to our traditional models, and then what is the innovation and ingenuity in our traditional models? And for in the powwow, I was thinking, well, look at the incredible way they tour, first of all. Very talk about self-enterprising and meeting people and relationships and big social part is, a part of it, but also very intergenerational, very intercultural, and very interdisciplinary in a way, and very intertribal, and multi-tribal, bringing other people in, whoever, even if they're not Indigenous. There's even dances for that. So there's an inclusivity that I really responded to as well. So it's like taking the best out of that and sort of trying to work with it in a very contemporary way. Not that powwow is contemporary, but, and then how do you build something based on Indigenous innovation, ingenuity, and worldview moving forward? And why do things have to always be all cut up into pieces and siloed? How can we look at something as more holistic, and parts of ourselves that we have inherently might have inherent gifts for, and how do we make those gifts sort of rise up and be seen and noticed? And community often lets you know, hey, can you do this for me? And can you do that for me? Can you speak on this? Whatever it is, right?
Yeah, absolutely. What I like that you're saying, and that everybody has kind of touched on in different ways, is this idea of relations and relations with others and relations to the process, and how you view yourself within it. It's such a big piece, and that mind frame is such a big piece. And I think artists have this advantage of being really potentially good at business, because it is a creative process. If you really break down any business and you look at it, is creating something from nothing and putting all these different pieces together in a way that sustains it in itself, right, and self-generates. And I think the artistic process, it can be very similar. And a lot of you mentioned talking about the different teams. You talk about the artist teams, you talk about the business teams, you talk about delegating, you talk about target markets. That's all relationship building. So I really like that in many different ways. All of you kind of highlighted that piece. So thank you. So moving on to our second question, and you've already given some pieces of advice and some things, but for people who are maybe in that state where they're starting to look at themselves as like, hey, I'm more than just an artist. I need to make this thing work as a business, and maybe have never really considered themselves as that, but they're in that space right now. What would be some things that you would say that would help them in that moment, that maybe has from your own experience or just what you've learned or are continuously learning? So anybody can take us off.
I'll go. I'm trying to wait an appropriate amount of time to pause, but first of all, before I speak, I just want to say, Solitaire, I keep thinking you're a virtual reality human. Every time you come up larger, there's something about that background and the way you sit in front of it. It's really pulls me in. I keep thinking, this person. Anyway, so it's very cool. I love it. Again, what everyone was saying, it all connects. You're absolutely right. I keep hearing things that people are saying, and I'm like, oh, I should have said this, or oh, I should have said that, but also because they're too relatable. They're all things that happen organically, but then you become conscious of them as they're happening. So for me, I think recognizing that whether it's being creative or whether it's being business, Sandra, you really touched upon this a lot, was the idea that essentially what you're doing is you're problem solving. You're predicting what problems may come along the way, and then you're figuring out ways of solving those problems and how you can make things work. And, you know, sort of talking them through. Like when I go for my nightly walks with my dog, I'm constantly trying to figure out how to resolve things that have been, you know, that I know that I need to figure out in order to move into a certain direction, whether it's titling a painting or whether it's actually coming up with a concept. And even when I come up with a concept, I have to figure out what, like, when I'm working on a painting, I have to see ahead of myself. I don't do a lot of sketching. I actually don't really sketch. I just kind of get into the painting. But I have to be aware of how certain images can look and how I have to make sure that they look in a way that they're telling the story that I want to tell, not to take the viewer into a different direction. So there's that. So sort of predicting your pitfalls and problem solving. I think the idea of looking at, you know, Daniela said that she went to business. She took, sorry, what did you took business courses, right? About business planning?
Yeah, yeah.
For me, it was actually looking at the different business models of artists, because there are actually articles and books on different sort of pathways that artists can take, whether you want to go through institutions and work through grants, whether you want to be an art fair artist, whether you want to, and sort of tells you, it helps you sort of focus what your ultimate goal is. At least that was for me. So understanding the different business models. And the tricky part about that is that those business models aren't locked in stone. So even though you can say, this is my business model, this is my plan, you might still venture out into a different type of business model that's really not part of your plan. So you're sort of creating your own, but you're keeping in mind always where you want to go. I knew my goal as an artist was to be represented in a commercial gallery. I have other goals. But as a Black artist, there's not a lot of representation in Toronto. That's a known fact, or in Canada, really. So I knew that there were certain things that I would do or could do that could make me either more or less attractive to commercial galleries. But at the same time, I also recognized that I had to make a living, and I also had to get my work out there into the public. So there are rules to those business models, but you still have to sort of adjust them in order to do what gets you further ahead. That's one of the things I think that is really important that I've learned, is to predict my pitfalls and to recognize in advance that some of the legwork's already been done for you. So by studying the business models, studying those sort of planning ideas, you sort of can sort of cherry pick the things that will work for you along the way. And you can, you know, not to use that word again, pivot, you can realize that you might have to switch a little bit, but it's good to know that you're not always the first one inventing the wheel, that there are plans that you can follow.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. And it's kind of understanding the landscape that you're trying to work within a little bit. And Sandra, you talked about that as well a little bit with like traditional knowledge as well, and traditional formats. So it doesn't even have to be within business models. It can be within models of community work or whatever it is that your creative work is in, and kind of seeing how do you fit within that, and what can you learn from it. Absolutely.
Can I add one more? Oh, sorry. Yeah. One more thing that really benefited me as an artist was when I did do artist fairs, that gave me a direct link to the actual potential buyers. So because I started painting, as I said, on a whim, and it just sort of blew up, I learned to ask a lot of questions to the people at the fair. The people who were drawn to my work, I asked them about what they liked about my work. And that gave me the initial skills to actually learn how to talk about my work. Mm-hmm. So by engaging with other people, asking them pointed questions, like have really clear questions about what do you like about this? Well, what specifically? Then you start to see what other people see in your work as well. And it helps guide you with regards to being able to understand some of your strengths. They might see things that you don't see in your work or hear in your work or whatever field you're in. So it's always good to get fresh eyes on it. And it really does develop your ability to broaden your understanding of what it is that you're trying to do. To me, that's what it works.
Yeah, that's a really good piece of advice. Yeah. Thank you. Anybody else, or who's next?
Yeah, I can chime in because I think what Gordon just said is brilliant, and that has helped me a lot. Just I did the same thing with my wedding clients. I asked them for words to describe my work, or why, you know, what they liked about working with me. And those words would pop up every time somebody else would inquire. And then it just gave me something to talk about. And it gave us like that bridge and a connection piece. And I think the relationships, I know we've already mentioned this, but relationships are so important. And not just, you know, with your ideal clients, but with the peers in your industry, because a lot of where I am at now has come through building relationships with my peers who I, you know, share similar values with. And I'm currently also pivoting, as we all are maybe, but, and I'm trying to do more art. So I'm kind of like trying to do the same thing in the art world and get to know some people there. And it's very exciting, and it is reminding me of the time when I spent a lot of time hanging out with wedding photographers. And I, you know, now I have one of my like amazing friends from that. So I think that's just, and it's a more genuine way of learning about yourself and your business through other people, like through their eyes, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think it did you want to go?
No, go ahead.
I think that the most important thing is, you know, what is your North Star? You know, what is the brightest star in your constellation is the North Star. And what is that? And what is essential about it? And what is distinct? And also to know that you do have to adapt even then, because the North Star, even though it's a fixed star, does actually move a little bit too. So, you know, there's adaptation or evolution, and, you know, that it makes things even sometimes better than you would even imagine. And so not to have too fixed of an idea, but there is sort of a core somewhere in there that is uncompromised, and you don't let people touch that necessarily, because they will touch the other layers, but there's a core, I think, that has to stay very much intact. And you have to determine what that is. I would also say what I've noticed is that inspiration doesn't keep the hours of 9 to 5. No, because inspiration can happen sometimes at 3 in the morning, or, you know, at other times, but it certainly doesn't keep the hours of 9 to 5. So those of us who think it's a 9 to 5 job in terms of that, I mean, it might be, you'll be limited by that. So the other thing is, I noticed really early on, is never to build the budget first. So the budget before the dream. I always have the budget come later. I always let the dream happen first, as big as it wants to be. And then I put numbers to it. But if I start doing the budget first, then I'm already diminishing my dream. I'm already diminishing the size of something that could be much larger. And the really, I think, important thing is, you know, you think that asking people for help or asking people their advice, people love to give advice. They really do. And there's so many talented people who have great advice. And sometimes we think, well, we don't want to ask them too much because the dream is, you know, too big, and, you know, but it's actually the opposite. The really busy, good people see the size of a dream, and they want to be part of it because they can feel the size and the energy and the epic nature of something that could be momentous, something that could be a shift, that could be a paradigm shift, that could be moving or centering. In my case, I'm really interested in centering Indigenous stories and narratives and artistry to the center of the Canadian consciousness, into the center of the Canadian narrative, because we are on the margins, you know. And how do we do it? So that whole centering is like a lifelong, that's more than one lifetime, right? So so having the really big, long lasting, imagine having a vision that could last 7 generations. We do 7-generation thinking as Indigenous peoples. We're encouraged to think long-term, not short-term. So if you think of your dream having 7 generations, what could that look like? And then bring that dream to people, because somehow the size of something, the energy of something attracts more energy, attracts good people attracts people who are busy, attracts. So it doesn't have to be small. It can be as big as you want it to be. And I think the last thing that I would say is don't do everything the same as everyone else. You know, you don't have to look at a business model and go, oh, that's a good business model for me. It's probably not. And, you know, and never start with a problem. We're not a problem. Indigenous people are not a problem. We're not an issue. We're much more than our issues. And we're allowed to think outside of our issues. We're allowed to think about outside of our issues as marginalized people in Canada. Because if we think within those limitations, we are already, the colonial powers are already have a hold of us if we only stay inside of our issues, if we only stay inside of our problems. So think beyond that and think about what we have to give, and the beauty and the vitality and the innovation and the ingenuity. That's what we have to offer the world and to one another. And so I'll give you a really sort of an example of that. So when I first started Red Sky, people were saying, when are you going to launch your company? When are you going to launch it? Launch it. Business models, launch your company. Everybody launch your company. Why would I launch my company now? We've not done one project. Nobody knows who we are. Media is going to show up. Why would they show up? We don't have anything to show yet. So I thought, I am going to wait 2 years before I launch my company. I'm going to wait until we have 2 strong projects under our belt, the first one and then the second one. And after the second one, I'm going to launch the company then. So I waited 2 years, invited media, all the media that I wanted to come came. It was so packed. And it was like you had to walk through like sideways to get through, you know, and it was wonderful. But that's because I waited a bit for the right moment.
Mm-hmm. That's such an important piece of advice. And it connects back to that long-term thinking and planning and that big dream. Because if you only focus on the small dreams in front of you, you wouldn't even be able to wait.
Can I just ask Sandra a question? Or I just want to point out, when I was talking about problem solving, I meant with regards to designing how to build your business, not necessarily addressing problems within a community. So I hope that wasn't what you thought I meant, or if that's what you thought I meant, that's not what I meant.
Yeah, it's just a different take, isn't it, really, when you think about it? Because if you're you're out walking problem solving, I don't feel like I'm solving a problem. I feel like I am aligning, recalibrating, re-envisioning something new. It's not solving an existing problem. And in fact, it's not putting my energy there. That's just the difference.
I think we're
talking about the same thing, but we're coming at it.
The same thing, but I just didn't want you to think that I was directing it. I know that what happens, especially as a Black artist, a lot of focus, solitaires, it's just that a lot of the focus becomes on negative issues. And so my work is about uplifting. So I don't want it, there's sort of what I call pain torture, where a lot of people just always focus on these negative things that have affected the Black community. And that's what and I understand a lot of people figure out they have to solve those sort of bigger problems. Yeah, I was really just talking.
I get you.
Talking about from like almost like an engineering concept, like, oh, if I put this there, the gravity will make that fall. So then I need to make sure I have something that suspends it.
Yeah,
that's what I meant in that sort of sense.
Gotcha.
And it's kind of what both of you are speaking in terms of business. If you use business terminology, it's a strength-based approach.
Exactly.
Problem-based
approach.
So both of you are coming at that.
Yes.
Yeah, so thank you. Solitaire, what about you?
Man, I mean, I don't know how to follow all that up. That's so much gems. I mean, I think for me, just to kind of touch on a little bit what everybody said, one thing that I kind of realized acutely during the lockdown is this idea and concept of fear of success. Fear of, just like Sandra was talking about, instead of starting with the budget, starting with the idea. Because when you start with a budget, you start to think, well, okay, well, it's going to cost me this much to do this and this. And then you start to really talk yourself out of your inspiration. And as artists, if you're not moving based on your inspiration, then you're not moving in truth with your art. So that is something that I'm still really tackling in my own career, which really in my field of hip hop is a very like ultra youth driven culture, to the extent where if you're, you know, the kind of the thinking goes, if you're trying to start a career as a rapper in your 30s, you're wasting your time, because you're it's like a young person's game. So when I first decided I was going to move into doing to buying equipment and running a studio, my thinking, even back when I was young and just like in my early 20s, even back then, still wanted to be successful and still dreaming of touring and, you know, living that celebrity lifestyle, so to speak. Having that goal, I was still always grounded in the sense that I just wanted to have a career and be able to pay my bills and live my life without having to work a 9 to 5. I wanted to be able to survive off of my art. And that to me was success. It doesn't, like, the trappings, the jewelry and the girls and the lifestyle was great, but I also was coming from a very grounded place where those things were nice accessories, but they weren't really, they didn't talk to my spirit and who I was as a person. So fortunately, I was grounded enough to not kind of get caught up in chasing that and just trying to pursue a career as an artist. So as I got older, and, you know, for myself, even though I had a huge opportunity to travel and tour the world and perform in front of thousands and thousands of fans, it was also, I was touring with Cardinal Official, I was touring with Shaw Claire, and I was kind of like comfortable in that role, being the support, being the addition to their shows and kind of contributing to building up their stories. And in retrospect, probably didn't spend enough time building on my own, which kind of brought me to a stage where I was like, okay, well, you know, I don't want to, you know, I'm in my 30s. I'm not trying to chase a career trying to become a famous rapper. So what's the next evolution? My talent in production, my talent in songwriting, working with singers and rappers. I have a great ear for melody, writing hooks, all that kind of stuff. So why don't I use that and surround myself with other artists and do artist development? Then I started to, like, you know, as an independent artist, you kind of learn to do things yourself. So that's how I started learning how to record myself. So I familiarized myself with, you know, production software like Pro Tools and Logic and stuff like that, and started just getting more so into the back end of things, where I'm running a business that is not dependent on my success as an artist, but it's dependent on my skill set. And that's when I kind of started to learn about how do you price yourself as an engineer? Like, what does it entail? How long does it take you to record a song, mix a song, master a song? And then how do you kind of budget all that to cover your expenses and then be able to make a little money to save and all that kind of stuff? So gems for me, I use cliches a lot, because cliches typically come about because it's proven to be true over time. One of the things that you quickly learn in business is you get what you negotiate, you get what you ask for. And to Gordon's point, you know, there's a bunch of business models out there, but the fact of the matter is nothing is going to be tailor fitted to what it is that you're trying to do. So you really kind of have to think like, I think as Bruce Lee says, be water, my friends. You have to be able to adapt and think that, okay, here's the framework, but how do I navigate through that? Because what I'm doing is not necessarily the same as what everybody else is trying to do. Like, you know, especially when you're talking about things like artist development. It's such a kind of personal, it's like almost like personal coaching. Every artist is different, and what it's going to take to motivate one artist to get to achieve their goal is going to be completely different, like from a singer to a rapper to a spoken word artist. So the pivot, just like everybody alluded to, is so crucial, and being flexible, being personable. I'm a terrible marketer. Snezzy will tell you. I'm a person that is like, okay, let's do all the groundwork, and then on the day I'll show up, I'll be ready off script, I'm ready to perform, but nobody knows about it because I'm terrible at promotion. So it's kind of like to the point where you gotta, you know, build your team, you know, figure out what your weaknesses are, and find people who are gonna contribute to that to make the whole situation stronger. So it's really just kind of thinking outside the box. Another thing you learn in show business is you don't know what's holding the show together behind the scenes. You ever go into those like a department store and you see a mannequin and they're wearing a button-up shirt and it's tailor fit, snug, abs, and then you turn the mannequin around and it's like safety pin behind the back to make it look good, right? So it's like the presentation looks amazing, but behind the scenes, it's held together by like Scotch tape and safety pins. You know what I mean? So it's really about what is the end result, following your North Star, like Sandra said. My North Star has always been, I want to live in the creative field. How do I maintain myself as an artist, as a business, being able to pay my bills? So maybe you have to scale back on your lifestyle. So pretty much like what you eat, like you eat what you kill, in terms of you're always going to be working. I'm always going to be working as an artist. I don't ever see I don't think there's any artist who works towards retiring and says, I'm not going to be an artist. After 65, I'm just going to, move to the Bahamas and live off my savings. No artist, any artist who is devoted to their skill set will tell you, Quincy Jones is still out there partying like he's 19 years old, because that's the field that we're in. So it's like, when you think of it in terms of the longevity of it, I love what Sandra said about 7 generations. It's like really thinking long term. I'm going to be doing this for as long as I can foresee in some capacity. So figuring out what drives you, what motivates you, and staying true to that, even when you're pivoting. And all of my pivots, even the work that I do in terms of like the social justice work that I do with the Forgiveness Project, it still aligns with my music, because I use pop culture, I use hip hop, I use production, I use lyricism as the framework for these discussions, because that is a big connection point for the audience of, especially when we do the programs in jail. Like, that's usually what brings us all together, the love of hip hop. And then now I could take the hip hop lyrics from what I grew up with and frame it. Like, back then we're like just looking at the lyricism. Now you look at a song like Mobb Deep, Shook One, and you realize they're actually rapping about the anxiety that they were facing in the hood. And you use that to translate that and explain concepts of anxiety and mindfulness and meditation and trauma to young men in jail, and explain to them how trauma and anxiety is affecting their decision making when they experience so much violence and abuse. You know what I mean? So it's like everything in my career, even if it's outside of the realm of me as an artist, directly relates back to me as an artist in some way, shape, or form. So finding your North Star and being true to that, for better or for worse, because it's not always going to be all good. It's like right now we have a music school, For Sound Music, and we've had to shut down for 3 months. So now we're trying to figure out how to shift, but still maintain, the students who want to take lessons online. But you have to be flexible. You have to be flexible, and you have to be, have integrity at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I want to come to the question of how are you shifting? But, one of the things that I want to kind of highlight, everybody really is talking about, is this sense of like, what is your why, your purpose? Again, I'm going to throw in the business lingo here and there, but that's really what the North Star, and that, even the 7 generations, which I love, is such a beautiful image, of dreaming big. And then you talk about, Sully, you talk about the different skill sets and different strengths and everything. And, when we run this workshop, the Creative Boost, one of the first sessions we always do is looking at something we call the sweet spot, which is where your passions, your why, and your skills and your strengths come together. And that sweet spot will change and shift depending on what's going on around you. A lot of people's sweet spots has to shift now because of COVID, right? So you are then looking at, and you talked about like your history of, being from a musician to producer to working in social justice, like all of that. Within that, you still maintain that sweet spot. Is just using different skill sets, using different strengths, but the passion, the why, the North Star stays the same. So I think that's such a great way that, all of you really highlighted and touched that on different points. But so I want to go into that question of how are you shifting right now, which is, in everyone's mind, especially in the creative sector, which has been hit very hard. How have you been dealing with the hit of COVID, and as we move forward and with all the uncertainty, you know, what are your visions? What are your strategies? Where are you pivoting?
I guess I'll take that up for us. You know, we have a studio for sound media, and we also have a music school for sound music. We have teachers that teach guitar, drumming, piano lessons. Since COVID, we've had to shift. We couldn't have in-class lessons anymore, so we had to shift to online. And what we found when we were trying to make that transition is a lot of schools were just basically sending their teachers to teach from home. And they're like, you have Google Chat, you have Zoom, WhatsApp, like whatever, just go home and teach online, right? We didn't want to do that, so we took some time to figure out what was the best way to deliver it in terms of like the sound quality and scheduling, and making it very easy for students to access and book their classes online, and the teachers to get online, and a whole scheduling system. So a lot of that took pretty much like a couple of months. And then after that couple of months, you realize, oh, but wait, you know, people are not working. So their kids are home and they've got bigger problems to worry about. And then you start to realize that, you know, music lessons for a lot of families is a luxury. It's not a necessity. So it's kind of like, well, how do we, you know, that was a big part of our business in the space that we had. So, you know, now it's about like making the studio multifunctional in terms of like using the spaces that were for guitar and piano to redesign them to have people who want to record podcasts, or people who want to come in and have meetings, or, you know what I mean, just to kind of repurpose the space. So having the space allows us to kind of be flexible in that way, while we're still working with online lessons, which is actually starting to pick up now that things are starting to, you know, relax a little bit in terms of the shutdown measures. But it's you know, it's challenging, and you really kind of have to, again, if your vision is not long term, if you're thinking just until, you know, making it to the end of this year, then it's pretty daunting. But, you know, we're thinking next summer at this point, and we're invested in terms of, you know, our families. We're keeping in touch with families and keeping them up to date on the developments as they come about. And yeah, it's as everybody will probably say, it's unparalleled times, it's unprecedented times, and these are the times when those who can adapt quickly are going to be able to survive the most effectively. So I don't really have a blueprint, but we're just trying to navigate it day by day and prepare ourselves for when things are going to settle down eventually, and hopefully we'll be able to get back to some sort of normalcy.
Yeah, thank you. Definitely. And I think, you know, when COVID first hit, there was like a meme that went around and said, artists will save the world. And I think, you know, what kind of spoke to that was the artist's ability, or the creative individual's ability to be resilient and to adapt, because the process of creating something requires that in itself, right? Yes. Just even the process of creating a song, a painting, a piece, you know, it requires to adapt to the ideas, to the concept as it forms itself, right? So I think that there is a lot, it's good to be able to remind yourself as an artist that you have that, and then just tapping into it, as you say. So that's great. Thank you. What about everybody else?
I can go. So I actually, if I can even say, this pause that we're all in kind of came at a good time for me, because I had been going and had pretty successful last few years, which ensured that I could have this pause without too much stress. But I kind of took this time to do what Sandra was talking about, to reconnect with my North Star, to just develop more creatively and to learn some more, but just to really connect with myself creatively, which I felt was about due. And I don't know if I would have given myself the amount of time that I needed to do that. And especially when you have a business that has started running, and I mean, I'm grateful. But yeah, for me, the pivot really has been more personal rather than business related. And I think that's also important, because if you're an empty shell, then you're just gonna burn out, and that's such a big thing in our society. But yeah, so for me, it's been really inward and playing a lot.
Yeah, and you bring your person to your business, so it's connected.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Sandra or Gordon?
Want to go ahead, Sandra?
Sure, I'll go. I think it's a really unique opportunity to rethink relationships and rethink the way that we work, and what has been working, what has not, and what could come out of an organization or one's own artistry, the expression of that is new, or something that you've been working on. One of the things that I've noticed with Red Sky is that every project actually started getting more involved in three-dimensionality and in motion graphics, and in other sort of more sort of screen-based visual and animation. So we were already our last project was very much like that. And so that was really interesting to now be flung into COVID, where it's really about looking at screen-based technologies and artistry now. And so I'm really excited by what the screen can inform. And then when we go back on stage, how the screen is going to affect even the live performance now, because I think it will have always some sort of screen, as we always did. We're very imagistic based, like we're really known for our physical athleticism, but also really known for our live music and the images. And so the images now have more ability to really sort of grow and develop. And I'm really interested in that in terms of moving forward. And I do think that's going to be something that's going to continue. I'm interested in the new audiences that I'm meeting online, because we are online, and because we're offering a little bit of our creative processes, or a little bit of our even some of the talk. We have a Red Talks session, and so even the last one we did, 5,000 people showed up online. 5,000, close to 5,000 people. And when I look through the names of it, I was like, wow, I don't know a lot of these people. This is great. So this is, developing new audiences in different ways. And they will, I think, also come back to the physical and be part of the physical shows as we start to tour more. I'm not, what the new normal, I definitely don't want to go back to normal, whatever that was. And but the new normal is something too that, and I'm interested in the disruption that can happen, because now we have voices. We have voices that are online, where we can actually address, even within institutions, for example, to talk about institutions, or to rethink our relationships with institutions. So we had lined up some pretty incredible relationships, and they all sort of fell a little bit. And then I thought, okay, now I got to rethink this in terms of what we can offer. And then I came back with an offering. They're like, yeah, great. So sometimes you have to do the thinking for people. You have to do the thinking for institutions. You have to do the thinking to help them see what and to be a really good communicator. And, of that's like gold, if you can learn how to communicate, and especially to express an idea, a vision, and put it down, and then give it some feet as well. Put some feet to that vision, and walk and then run. It's really exciting to do that. So it's been really sort of inventive of how to rethink everything, because Red Sky will take the gold, we'll take the gold, and we'll take some of the good stuff that's been working for us. But is there possibilities of opening up in a whole other way that is aligned with the future that's coming, that is here, let's say? And it is the year of 2020. So is this 2020 vision, and what's happening with the pandemic, with the rising of this incredible energy of collaboration and brotherhood, but at the same time, incredible, everything that's already just been there, like racism and the way we treat elders and domestic abuse and all that, also part of that. But this is an opportunity for us to have 2020 vision globally, and to look at, you know, if like everything's being seen now, let's hope, or a lot of it is being seen, but within that is also this rising energy that is really exciting. And so how can we look at that and harness that and bring that into what we do? And it really is about a time of going inward a little bit too. And I believe, you know, like you were saying, like going inward and focusing, but that only is an extension into the organizations, only extension into our leadership and our own creativity. And the more of a wellspring source that you have to bring, the more that you can bring out and share that with the audiences and people that need it. And so they're all connected for sure, like you had said earlier. So thank you.
Absolutely. And you know, the first part that you talk about, the Red Sky already exploring screen-based work makes me think of something that Gordon said earlier about preparing for your future pitfalls. And it's, in a sense, it's almost like you were already doing the work of, before even knowing that the whole industry will experience a collective pitfall, you know, the performance industry, right? And kind of setting those things up. And that speaks back to your long-term vision that you kind of talk about. And so it's really great to see that, you know, the words you say, and then actually that's how your company is running. So the two coming together in tangible form. So it's really great to see that. Thank you. Gordon, what about you?
It's a complicated question for a number of reasons. I'm a side gig guy. I'm actually an elementary school teacher. So I also teach grade 2 as well as being an artist. So I had to wrap my head around teaching 7-year-olds. But right before the pandemic hit, or when it was finally, everything got shut down, I had just opened my first solo show at a new gallery. I think it wasn't my first solo show, it was my first solo show with a gallery that I am now signed on to. And that was open for a week. And it was one of those shows that I was really proud of. I'm proud of my work, but this one I was really going into a new direction. I was really happy with it. And so I had to do a lot of inward reflection as well. And I actually didn't paint for for the first couple of months. And I paint almost every day. So I part of it was questioning and waiting to see what was going to happen with regards to, you know, fine art in a home is a luxury item, you know. And so I had to sort of wrap my head around the fact that the future may not necessarily need the kind of work that I'm doing. And then I started painting again, and I started communicating again on Instagram. And as a Black artist, I've met so many challenges. Like when I get rejected from anything, it just makes me work harder. So anytime I get a rejection letter, I'm like, you know what, screw you. I'm gonna apply again next year, and I'm gonna show you I can do this, because I'm also not just trying to do the best for myself, but I'm also I have to be honest and look at systemic racism and how it reaches, and particularly in the art world. So when this all started happening, and then, you know, the disruption happens with Black Lives Matter and people start looking at it, all of a sudden, all these institutions that had ignored me, or these businesses, these galleries, all of a sudden started following me on Instagram. And all of a sudden my work became very topical. So it's a mixed feeling, because my show, I ended up doing some new pieces for my show. We relaunched the show. The plan was to relaunch it, and I sold out. It's the first show that I've ever sold all my paintings. Oh. And it's weird, because part of you is cynical. Like, you're kind of like, I'm being honest, like, you know, all of a sudden now people want my work. I mean, it was selling, but you know what I mean? But it's a very odd time, because I'm also learning to say no to people now. Now I'm really looking at businesses or organizations that are reaching out to me, and I have, you know, the power has always been there, but you always have to make judgment calls on every decision that you make. And now that organizations are reaching out to me, say, oh, it'd be great to show your work in our magazine. I'd be like, well, what's your plan to break down systemic racism in 400 years of colonization before I give you my painting? You know? And they say, oh, we don't really have a plan. And I say, I'm not going to be your token. Like, I'm not just going to, you know, Blackout Tuesday was such an incredible day for me, because I got to call out so many people on so much. And it was great because it was a collective attitude of people saying, we are finally being heard. Like, we've always been loud, we've always been clear, but people have chosen, at least for a period of time, to start listening. I'm still moving forward in the way that I am, but I realized really quickly that the attractiveness of the Black Lives Movement has worn off for a lot of people already. And so I realized that my art for the last few years has been not just art, but it's also been activism. And so I'm going to continue, or my plan was always to continue. It is kind of that idea of the 7 generations. I want to be able to make spaces for future generations after me. But now knowing that people are just, all those businesses are now repivoting back to their normal is making me, again, more aggressive about making sure that those changes back to the old way aren't going to happen. So I'm going to continue calling people out. I'm going to continue. My work was always about that, or not always. There was a point when I shifted and I started focusing on representation and painting, and that became what drove my painting, and that became my purpose for painting. But this period in time has made me even have more purpose with my work. So now that I'm painting again, I usually try to paint things that were sort of representative of the experiences of Black people in a sort of more general way. And I'm not saying that in a monolithic culture way, but I'm just saying experiential, my stories that some people might happen to share. But now I'm seeing that I'm actually doing work that is relating to what's happening right now, which I had never done before. I'd never done paintings that were specifically about what's happening right now. And that's really driven me and made me it really has reignited a new chapter of creativity in me. So I had to go through a little dormant phase, I think, and process it. And I think that's healthy. I think I'm glad to hear that, Danielle, you took the time or taking the time. I think people were putting so much pressure on themselves because as artists, we were being told, you need to do this, you need to represent. And even the Kingston Prize, which is a portrait competition that happens biannually, they started putting out little emails about, making sure that we're aware of capturing the moments that are happening right now. And I thought, you're kind of directing artists what to do, and you're sort of saying what you need. Anyway, that's a whole other story. But even getting those emails, I took as a challenge, because I said I wasn't going to do mask paintings, for examples. But I did start doing mask paintings as they relate to Black people and Black experiences. So I started doing these whole things with sports masks and taking sports equipment and making them into masks representing, the oppression that people have experienced. And so the situation now has really sort of pushed me to continue to strive for success in new ways, as opposed to just sticking to the series and the ideas I already had. Sorry, that was a bit of a long, rambly answer, but.
No, not at all. I think to summarize what a lot of you said is kind of really taking that space to go in and reconnect to your, what matters to you, what are your values, and then seeing how does that relate to what's going on, and where is that disruption, and that disruption can look like differently. It can be personal, it can be systemic, it can be both, right? And I think that a lot of you kind of touch on that. Because, in that process of creating something and creating something new, there is a natural process of disruption that's happening when you're putting out a new narrative or a different narrative, or a narrative that maybe is not new, but you're coming at it from a different side. Yeah. So I think it's great that all of you kind of touch on that in different ways. I want to give some room for people in the audience to ask some questions. If nobody has any questions, I do have another question, but I would like to leave some space for anybody that has questions. So if you have a question, this is your opportunity to ask. I will invite you to come and ask on the mic, just because it's a lot easier. But just put your hand up so I can see, raise your hand rather than just going on the mic. And then I will call you out by the raised hand. And if you really don't want to come on the mic, you can write it in the chat as well, and I'll read it out. So I just want to see if there's anybody that has any questions, any comments on anything that was said, anything that you would like to maybe get further in-depth reflection on. Okay, so if you have a question, raise your hand, which is there at the bottom under reactions. And if you can't see it, it can be a thumbs up too, or a clap, or any emoji. Just so. I'm just gonna give it a few seconds for people to think if they want to ask.
Maybe we answered everything.
Yeah.
It was that good.
I mean, I will invite you to think about, this is really a great opportunity. As you can see, there is so much experience on this panel and across the sectors that I think it would be really a great opportunity for yourself if you have a question with something that, and it can be something that you're personally struggling with, or where you are currently with your business and artistic practice. Okay, so we have a question in the chat. Can I ask what capital/starting cost you all started your business with? So the question is, what capital or starting cost did you all start your business with?
First business, $5,000. Second business, nothing. When I start as a director at the Indigenous Arts at the BAM Center, when I came in, $30,000. Not a lot. All the way around.
Anyone else?
I didn't really start that way. I started as a hobby, which turned into a business. So I'm kind of, so I was supporting myself through teaching. And so that's one of the things that the challenge is for me right now is deciding when to pivot, the word of the day, to full-time painting. But I've already sort of built up the business that when that time has come, I can just keep moving forward.
I had started collecting like pieces of equipment for like studio, just like microphone, production software, laptop. And then my business partners, well, one of my business partners at our studio, For Sound Media, he was actually, I used to use his studio, which was in his apartment. And then he had the opportunity to move on to another bigger studio, which is where we're actually located at right now. So he offered me the opportunity to buy out his gear. And I was telling my dad about it. And he helped me finance a loan to buy the equipment. And then I moved into that unit and I was working out of there for 2 years. And then the studio that we're at right now was being sold by the previous owner. So then my buy-in for that business was bringing my equipment to furnish the studio. And then we all kind of brought in our equipment, and our fourth partner ended up buying a mixing console. So we kind of just put all of our resources together to get that space off the ground, and then the rest is the spaces. Yeah.
Yeah. And what about you, Daniela?
Yeah, I don't remember what the amount was, but it was similar to Solitaire, like kind of very slow collection of what I needed. And for what I needed, I mean, you don't really need much. There's a lot of like idea that you need certain amount of equipment or specific equipment or studio space, which I didn't have until 7 or 8 years later. And I don't have it anymore because it doesn't make any sense. But yeah, and I borrowed a lot of stuff from friends. So very low, as low as you can go is best.
Yeah. So we have another question as well. And this one is probably a little bit more of a hefty question. What do you feel discouraged you the most from your dreams at any point, and how did you overcome it? This might be our last question, unless somebody wants to put another one in.
Other people's perceptions. The hardest thing to do as an artist is find your North Star. I'm gonna steal that from you, Sandra. So that's beautiful. A lot of times as artists, you kind of measure yourself compared to other people's version of success or what they think you should do or what your voice is. I mean, there is an element of, sometimes what you think is what people want to hear from you may not necessarily be what people want to hear from you. So it is a kind of a journey of discovery. But you know, when you know what your purpose is and what you want to say, remaining true to that despite what obstacles or people say about what they think you should be doing, eventually, the more you continue and focus on your journey, you'll find the people that you're supposed to connect with if it's authentic, what you're presenting. That's the biggest obstacle, because fear of success, I can't stress enough, is a real thing. Fear of your own power to accomplish your dreams. You got to push through.
Yeah, absolutely. Does anyone want to else add to it? You don't all have to answer all these questions, so if you don't want to add to it, you don't have to.
To be quite honest, for me, the discouragement was going to an art fair and being the only black face there. So I know we talked about, someone mentioned, like, you know, it's good to stand out. Yes, it is. But the work I was doing was different. I was different. The audience that was there was very different from me. And so that was a challenge. That was a challenge. But again, that just pushed me to want it more. Especially the more I got involved in art, and I started to realize that there was generations below me that were experiencing racism that was worse than I experienced when they was their age. It just kind of drove me more to make sure I'm occupying those spaces. But it does come at a cost. Like, you are putting yourself out there, you're making yourself feel vulnerable. You have to overcome your own insecurities. And, you know, you've got to be confident. And the number of racist questions that I've dealt with during art fairs has been phenomenal. Like, it's just outrageous, the questions people ask me. And you have to understand that you're better than that. You're better than these unfortunate experiences. And there are amazing people out there as well. So you just kind of look past them and focus on the positive.
Absolutely. Anybody else want to add to it before I move on to the next question? Okay, so I'm going to ask the next question as a yes or no, because I think in sake of time, and because there's a question that's beyond that is a little bit more in depth. Would anyone recommend online or other resources for business planning for artists? So maybe you can say yes or no to that. So would you recommend online or business planning resources for artists? Not like which ones would you recommend, but would you recommend people do that?
Oh, yes.
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 I'd say, as I said, I think it's worth to have the knowledge. So even just reading it so you understand what is going out there. So as everyone's mentioned, you're doing your own path, but you should know what some of the paths look like in order to help inform what you're doing, in my opinion. Yeah. Yes.
You don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So read everything, and eventually the more you read, the more you'll kind of figure out what is going to work for you, what is nonsense, but you don't know what you don't know.
So my next question I want to maybe ask first to Snjezana, and if anyone else wants to add to it, that is written here, is when you have an idea that goes beyond your skill set and you need to add someone to your team or to partner with, what avenues have you found to be the most successful in finding those people to collaborate with, especially at the beginning stages of business?
That's for me, you said?
If you can start us off, and then anybody else.
At the beginning, a lot of it is gut, trusting your gut in terms of who could assist you and you feeling like they're a good fit. And I would really recommend people you admire or people that you think have something to offer you, and ask them. Just ask them. And don't be shy to ask, even if it's, like I said earlier, like even if it's just some advice. And then you start to build, like just even if it's just advice, you can start to build a relationship from there, even if it's a fit. I mean, when I first started, I just wanted to surround myself with certain kinds of people. I wanted to surround myself with somebody who knew about running a business. And so she became my sort of person, my go-to person. You need go-to people to help you. And, or if there was somebody in the funding, like, you know, who knew a lot about that, or cultural people that if I wanted them part of it. So it's just just identifying people that you would like, and then surrounding yourself, even artists like that you, fellow artists that you really admire, like, can you also bring them in closer to you in some ways through the work, and build. Yeah.
So almost a little bit like identifying those different areas where there's potential for relationships, and then who are the people within those areas.
That's a good way to say it. What are the areas that you need more assistance with, and then building those out. And even when you don't think you need it, it's also good to have people and just surround yourself and have them a go-to to know. I was very fortunate to have always somebody, I don't know the answer to that question, and just pick up the phone or Zoom these days, and they will help me have the answer, or at least give me some insight. So it's, but I would say start with people who inspire you, and people you aspire, towards, and colleagues that you think are believed to be fair and inspirational, and just especially a lot of inspiration, but also people with just really good practical knowledge as well. And leaders. Who are the leaders? Who's the kind of leader that you would like to become? What do you value as a leader or in a leader? Because there's all different kinds of leadership styles, and people have different styles. And of course, it's not ever about just one style. It's about actually being able to be able to go in between, and to have different kinds of leadership styles, and to seek those people out as well, because they're very inspirational. And that could be online as well. It doesn't have to. I mean, I sent an email to Noam Chomsky. Okay. I was like, dear Noam, I just want to let you know that I am so happy to be a human being on this planet, when I know other human beings, when you are a human being on this planet too. I thank you. And I want you to know you are so inspiring to me. He wrote back right away. Noam Chomsky. And then I had there was this other guy who was like a foremost scholar on Mongolia and First Nations. And I thought, dear Jack. And I was just like brazen to ask anybody for anything. And they write back, which is so amazing.
Yeah, and there's no ask that's too big of an ask, that's for sure.
Yes.
Yeah. And the last question, and then we're gonna wrap it up because I want to respect everyone's time, is did you have a day job in quotations? And if yes, for how long into your creative business?
I've answered that.
Yeah.
I still have my other job, my side gig, but it's hard because I actually love teaching as well. But I think going to the future, and especially with having such a clear purpose, I know where I want to go with my art. So, but yeah,
there's no right or wrong time. And I think I like how you word and you called teaching the sidekick, when a lot of artists would call the art the sidekick. You know?
Well, don't tell my students or families that, please.
But it's a good mental shift, definitely. So I want to thank you all for being here, sharing your time on Saturday. It's a very hot Saturday, so I know you couldn't been outside. So I really appreciate you taking your time. I appreciate everyone coming in. Everyone that is in this panel right now, it has all their information was sent to you when you registered. So please do go check out their work, interact, engage with their work, with their messages, with what they're doing. And again, just thank you so much. Thank you all for being here and sharing your experiences and your knowledge.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us, Jimmy Rich.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your
My pleasure.
weekend.
Bye, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.